Hello, hello, beautiful people. We are so excited and honored to have a friend, Swati Ji, on the podcast today. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So, we're going to jump right into it. And we'd love to start off this podcast asking you when was the first time you can remember when you felt something on a soul level?
Hmm. Probably as a baby, but there are also times as a child, really young, that um, just felt really connected to spirit and held and supported by spirit. Yeah.
I love that. Is there any moment in particular that your mind attaches to a memory?
I still have memories. I grew up in a community that was centered around Vedic knowledge and meditation. And so there were a lot of celebrations around various Vedic calendar holidays, and also just being in a school that also supported that kind of experience. That was really meaningful and memorable to me. There were a lot of positive experiences. Um, and we'll probably get more into this, but there there was also a lot of grief occurring for me as a child. And so I think it was mixed with kind of the holding of both. There was deep heaviness and sadness, and at the same time, a knowing that there is more than just this material life. And I think there's just always been a sense of trust in that for me.
Mm, I love that. And I find that that's so rare. And I'm so curious what community you grew up in where you were surrounded by this Vedic knowledge so young.
Yeah, so I'm an unusual white woman from America in that I grew up in the Transcendental Meditation community in Fairfield, Iowa, one of many. And then I was in and out of that community later on, and grew up, studying Sanskrit and um, introduced to Jyotish at age 7, Ayurveda around that time. But my mom was actually getting her advanced meditation technique while she was pregnant with me. So I often feel like I've done that experience twice in utero, and then also later on when I got older. And it was a very unique experience and certainly has shaped me and my life and my dharmic path, and also challenging. There have been a lot of challenges growing up in that kind of environment, a lot of confusion, a lot of doubts, a lot of people not doing their shadow work. And so having to kind of figure out my way with it all. And I'm still doing that, actually. That's the path, but also a lot of positives.
Wow, that's incredible that you were introduced at such an early age to so many of the Vedic sciences. So how did you decide on, and I think if you're drawn to one, you're drawn to all because they all work together. But I feel like you, and correct me if I'm wrong, are most drawn to Jyotish. So can you share a little bit about what that experience was like at age 7 and how you've played and danced with that throughout the years?
Yeah, so it's true that I think Jyotish was really my strongest curiosity. And I had my first session with a very renowned uh, Jyotishi at age 7, and that really sparked something for me. Um, it was almost like an obsession, and studying my chart and getting curious about what it meant, and tracking the dasha cycles, and later just devouring all the Jyotish books that I could and finding my way with it. And I really believe, and this is how I teach as well, that we need to start with our own chart. And we really need to use the chart as a way to understand ourselves. And I prefer to use it as a way to understand myself rather than having someone else tell me about myself. And that's, I'm really passionate about that with my clients, because often they come to me already kind of influenced by things they've been told. And a lot of what we have to do is unravel and pull up the seeds that were planted. And, well, how do you feel about this? And what does this mean for you? And actually support the level of understanding from a body wisdom perspective rather than someone just telling you what it means. So, in addition to the Jyotish, I would say Ayurveda is the other piece, because I also had a lot of health problems as a child. And so as usual, the body kind of decides or forces us to pay attention, and the path of the body and listening to the body, tending to the body actually became the primary focus. And fortunately, I did have resources to help me with that. But it's been more of a body path than anything.
Yeah. I love that you share about empowering people. And it's something, if people are listening to our podcast, we speak about so often, because I think there's just this tendency to feel powerless and like almost want to give our power away and have someone tell us things about ourselves. And Angelica and I both have had that experience, and we want to fit into this box that someone else told us we might fit into. And it's so liberating to realize that we already know everything we need to know about ourselves. And what's validating about getting your chart read, about understanding your own chart, is wow, this feels so me, and this is a gift that I can bring to the world, and this is so special. So it's one of the things we love and are drawn to about your work. And I just wanted to highlight that piece, because I don't think that everybody's doing that. I think that's something really special and unique about you. So I really appreciate you sharing that aspect of the way that you share and read and hold space for others.
Thank you. And I think that's a really key piece to highlight. Um, I feel strongly that we, and I'll speak especially to those who identify as female or are in a female body, that we've been conditioned to source outside of ourselves. And this is through colonialism and patriarchy and misogyny, but to really not trust the wisdom that's coming from within us. And there are a lot of misuses of the Vedic knowledge and wisdom that are actually more about disconnecting us from our body wisdom rather than truly reconnecting us with our body wisdom. And part of that confusion is that the body is so individual. There is not a one size fits all path or approach or way to clarify. The way in is so individual and so unique to each body. So it's more about, can we use these resources and tools to support your own understanding and your own knowing of your body? And that gets tricky when, first of all, we've been taught to source to an outer authority rather than the inner authority. And also, do we even know how to do that? What does that really mean? What does that really look like? And Jyotish is one of those tools that can be misused. And unfortunately, that's been my experience, which is why I have chosen a different way. I have had some very negative experiences with Jyotish, and part of my my mission was to make sure that women use this tool in a way that actually helps them trust themselves and their own inner wisdom more, rather than needing someone to tell them what their chart means. Sort of like going to a doctor and say, what's wrong with me? Rather than, I'm noticing, my body's telling me that it needs something, and I'm trying to troubleshoot what that is. It's very different.
Totally. And I think that's why I'm just very new to my Jyotish journey and studying, but that's why I feel so called to go deeper with it, because I feel a lot of the time that it gets a lot of people confuse um, that Vedic science is predictable and meant to put you in these boxes of what you can be and can't be. And I didn't know that from my studying experience. I was hearing it from friends who grew up with Jyotish, and they grew up in Indian families, and they went when they were younger, and that was their experience, and that was like kind of shocking to me. I didn't know that that existed, and now I kind of get why people have an adversity to it. And so I just love your mission so much, because the Vedas are so powerful and knowledgeable. It would be such a shame that if we were to waste this beautiful wisdom and just to write it off as being this predicted, disconnected type of science that some can say it is, when really it is just re-empowering you to know what you already know. And I think that's what like really intelligent healers will always do. It's like, oh, just telling me something I already know, but it's just like it's bringing out a little bit of my soul and lighting it up more, and so that I can learn to shine those, rather than in some cases if someone were to say something to you out of fear and shame, and then possibly manifesting something that wasn't even going to manifest in its life, but now that's there. So I don't want to go too much in a rabbit hole. I'm so excited that that is your mission and sharing on the empowerment piece. And I love how you already have done so much work with working with women and aligning them with the moon, because that is very much what Vedic wisdom can help us do, is to source our own power of the wisdom of the moon. So I'd love to hear, how do you connect women with the moon, and how do you use Jyotish and Ayurveda for that?
So let me just backtrack a little bit and just acknowledge how how we want to use, how to be in right relationship with this tool. Because for me, everything is about what is right relationship? What does that actually mean for me? How does that feel in my body? And because I've had so many harmful experiences with Vedic tools, um, I've also been able to find a way that is like, take what works and leave the rest, or identify what's pure knowledge versus someone's ignorance or consciousness superimposed on these tools. And that's, we're in Kali Yuga right now. So that's kind of the name of the game, is ignorance and adharma. And it's very rare, if ever, to find something that is pure knowledge and to be able to source from that place. So that's something that I'm still, I'm navigating. Obviously, that's a lifelong journey. Body wisdom is the key grounding piece. And this point in my journey, I run everything through my own body wisdom filter. And sometimes that takes longer to really clarify what is the body telling you, but by golly, it just does every time. And it still amazes me. I still and am in such awe of how the body shares its wisdom with us. And if we choose to listen, and if we can source from our body intelligently and wisely, it doesn't mean we don't need support, or we don't need to gather resources or holding or guidance, but that our proprioception is such that, and our orientation is such that we're sourcing from, and we understand that the body is really the intelligent and wise teacher that it is. And I could tell you some crazy Jyotish stories that have all reminded me that we have immense free will. And I think that that's something that we are missing with the standard approach to Jyotish, and how it's even being used in India these days. And I choose to, and this could be simply my Western centric awareness, because we kind of don't know. We all think we know, but the reality is at the end of the day, we all know nothing, right? So I choose to believe that we have an immense amount of free will, and that we must never forget that. And we must use Jyotish as a tool for supporting expansion of consciousness, meaning that based on our free will, we'll use it to make different life choices. Now, there are some karmas that can't be changed, and those are the karmas we came in with. But then we start evolving immediately after the time of birth. And I usually remind people that the karma that we're working with is not just ours. This is ancestral karma. The bulk of our karma is ancestral, in fact. So the breakdown from a Vedic perspective, and when I'm looking at a Jyotish chart, this is what I'm looking at. I'm seeing the body. So the chart is actually an imprint or a map of the body, and our karmas. And 25% of our karma is from our soul and our previous incarnations. 25% of our karma is from our mother and our mother's lineage. So her imprint and her lineage's imprint is also there. The father and the father's lineage brings 25%. And then 25% is also the 9-month gestation period and the birth process. So these are huge influences and factors when it comes to what we're working with. What are the bags that were packed? And then can we use this tool as a resource for strengthening our awareness of self, awareness of body, awareness of path and purpose, because ultimately the only reason we're here is for our soul to expand and awaken and transform and heal and grow. And that is the Dharmic path. And so if we use Jyotish in that way, we have a great ability to awaken on multiple levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And of course, that's the unique thing about Jyotish and how it's always been used, which differs from Western astrology or tropical, although many Western astrologers have now taken from Eastern approaches and philosophies and tried to adapt it, but it can't be adapted fully because the nature of the Jyotish chart is wholeness. And the ancient Jyotishis knew what wholeness was. They knew how to pull a tropical chart or source and orient from the sun, but they knew that that wasn't wholeness. And so the unique thing about Jyotish and studying your chart is particularly about your Dharma and your Dharmic path. And Jyotish has always been used for Dharma, the purpose of the soul. Why is it here? Give me some source of light so that I don't lose my way, because we know it's very dark out here and it's very easy to lose our way. And so Jyoti, the root word being light, this is a way to bring light to the soul. And we must not forget that. And then just to kind of come back to the moon piece, the passion I have around the moon is that is our emotional body. It's the divine feminine. When I look at the moon in a chart, I also know I'm looking at the mother and the mother's lineage as well. And this influences literally our relationship in our body with the emotional body. So, and I have a whole thesis around colonialism, patriarchy, misogyny, all the disconnection we have with the emotional body. But can we, and we can, but relearn how to source from the wisdom of our emotion? That's the wisdom of the moon. So long answer, but learning how to use the moon as a resource to support that emotional body wisdom is key for everything.
I mean, that was just a fabulous explanation. So thank you for going in depth about really connecting Dharma to Jyotish. That's going to just blow our community away.
And I actually want to go back to something you said, Swati. I would love to hear even just one of the stories, because I love stories and I think we learn and connect so deeply to them, of maybe someone who's listening has had their chart read and felt like they were stuck. Can you give an example of free will in the chart and how you've seen that play out and allow it to be empowering for someone who maybe has had more of that negative experience?
Love it. Yeah, we won't go into the negative experiences I've had, but let's be honest. There's a lot of people who misuse tools. So we always want to be really careful who we're working with and know that there's lineage behind whatever they're doing. I don't care who your resource is, but make sure there's lineage behind what they are offering. And we always go for pure of heart. At least that's my intention. And I remember my guru saying, we always speak the sweet truth. And it's true. When we look at a chart, sometimes I see horrific things, but I would never say that. And so the sort of the skill of the Jyotishi is being able to see what you see, but skillfully and compassionately help the person understand they have choice or what they have choice around. So I want to remind everybody the amount of choice that you have. All we're looking at when we're looking at the Jyotish chart is, of course, your body and how nature is impacting your body. The chart as a whole is your consciousness, the consciousness of your being, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And all of the influences that are occurring from nature, the planets, cycles, rhythms, seasons. We have to think of the chart and the transits that are occurring and the dasha cycles that are happening as the influences of nature. And so just like in winter, if you plant a seed outside, it's probably not going to grow because nature is not supporting growth at that time. It's a death cycle. So we either sync up and align with death, or we're going to be very disappointed that our seed didn't grow. So the reason why we study Jyotish is to honor these cycles and rhythms and to be in right relationship with nature as much as possible. We can't be perfect. We're human, so there's always a level of ignorance that's going to be at play. But if we can use this tool as a way to strengthen our alignment with nature's cycles and rhythms, it alleviates a lot of suffering. And so if you're in, say, a lifetime or even a time period that is heavily under the influence of Saturn, first of all, there's a great deal of acceptance that needs to take place. Resisting the ways of Saturn actually cause more suffering. And so learning and understanding the gifts and the wisdom that Saturn is bringing you and what it takes to actually be in right relationship with him. I'm just using him as an example because he tends to get a really bad rap, and a lot of Jyotishis are very negative about influences of Saturn or even Rahu at times. And really, to me, it's all about how to move into right relationship with the intelligence or the nature of these influences so we can make life a little bit easier. And the same thing goes with, you know, if you want a relationship, but you're not in a cycle that supports attracting or aligning with a relationship, maybe that's actually a spiritual time where you need to go deep within and spend more time in nature rather than going on a bunch of dates. If you know that, maybe you can orient towards what is the best use of your life force energy. And that's kind of what the Dharmic path is, actually. And letting go of what is not serving us. But that's where the grip of these, you know, how we want it to be rather than how it is. And creating a life that, for me, the intention is about nourishment. So what moves me and my body towards greater alignment with nourishment? And that's different in different cycles and rhythms. And you know, according to Ayurveda, you know, we eat differently in the winter versus in the summer. And there's a reason for that, because the body knows we're just nature. So a short answer is help people understand how to be in alignment with and right relationship with nature, and what the chart is and what the transits are supporting.
I love that. And I love that you gave the example of Saturn return, because a lot of our listeners are going through them, whether they are almost going into their 30s or almost going into their 60s. And that's what makes our community really special. And personally, I'm in my Saturn return. And if I hadn't known ahead of time, I'd be like, what the hell is going on right now? And I would feel those resistances. And I still, obviously, I'm human. I feel those resistances. And I'm like, I don't want to feel this anymore. I don't want to learn another lesson right now. But because my teacher had prepped me and said, you're strong, you've done the inner work, you know what to do, you got all the tools, I have that foundational layer to come back to. And I know, okay, this is making me stronger. I do feel like I'm moving like a snail right now, but I know it's going to be so fruitful at the end. And yeah, I love that you said acceptance. That really struck a chord in me too, because I just feel like I'm getting closer to the truth of who I am more than I ever have before. And yeah, I am really grateful for Saturn, even though I complain about it all the time to Rachel.
Well, that's sort of the nature of Saturn, is that grief and doing our grief work. And my Atmakaraka planet is Saturn, so my soul planet is Saturn. I came in the Saturn dasha, and then Sati Sat. So my early childhood was all Saturn, and my life is very Saturn. And I have a lot of clients under the influence of Saturn. Saturn is a great teacher, and I actually have come to love Saturn. It's sort of this bittersweet relationship we have. I think the thing to remember about Sati Sat is the power of transforming through our grief, and particularly grief from mother and mother's lineage, and how to really do our grief work. I've survived 2 Sati Sats now. You can do it. You might need some Saturn yagyas and some extra support, but slow and steady, and strengthening your support and your stability, and really learning how Saturn can be a wise guru. And he's not worldly as much as he is spiritual. And for those of us with more of a spiritual path and journey, it can actually be a very fruitful time for deepening that core intelligence of who am I and how am I in this world without compromise. And we need that on the Dharmic path, because our path is like no one else's. And I think that that's where we get really confused. And certainly I know from personal experience and working with hundreds of clients, the core wound is the loneliness piece. And that is the reality for so many of us walking a Dharmic path, and that's Saturn. It's the nature of Saturn. So if we can learn to accept and love and accept our whole being and strengthen that, the path becomes gentler. Doesn't mean we eradicate our grief, but the resiliency strengthens. And the moon is a part of that. I'll bring the moon back in, because that is the simple, basic, consistent, regular cycle that we can most align with, the easiest, especially as women, no matter what phase of our our body journey we're in. The moon waxes, the moon wanes. There is no easier example of aligning with nature and her cycles and rhythms than aligning with the moon and the rhythms of the moon, and using that as a resource for our grief work, for our emotional body work. It's why I'm so passionate about the moon and these cycles and these phases, because we can't make space for the nourishment and joy if we're not actually doing our grief work. That's Sati Sat, by the way. It's a 7.5-year grief process to make space for the joy and the nourishment that you are also here to experience. But the thing that I notice most with women in our culture is the resistance to, or the ignorance around, the monthly grief work that needs to be done. And that means honoring the losses, the disappointments, the pain, the challenges of every cycle, so that we don't have buildup. Because then what happens is years go by and you've never fully honored the pain of a certain loss, and it lives in your body and it's clogging the channels. It's ama, ultimately. It's clogging the channels of your receiving and your life force energy. So you're limiting the joy. And I always tell people, if you're up to here in undigested emotion, you only have about this much, let's say 80% of you is clogged with undigested emotion. And that's you, your mother's lineage, and your mother, your father's lineage, your ancestors, all of it, cultural grief, collective grief. You only have about 20% of space in the body literally available for your joy. You come to me saying you want more joy, but we got to move some grief here to make space for it. And so when we're honoring the cycles and the rhythms each month, it's a way, and this is why I love Vedic resources and Ayurveda, is it's preventative, right? We do these processes and we align with nature and her rhythms, and we eat certain ways and we have certain lifestyles to prevent the accumulation of toxins or suffering or dis-ease. And we have to think of our emotional body maintenance in the same way. Yes, it's about eating right and, going to bed on time and all these things, and taking your herbs and exercising and all of that. But I see so much neglect around just the reality of doing our emotional body work. And that means crying and screaming and singing and dancing and tapping and embodiment and art and all of these things that support the digesting of our emotion. So the moon is that intelligence.
I think it's really special that you bring up the word grief a lot when you talk about that work, because people call it shadow work, they call it limiting beliefs, but I love that you specifically say grief. And this is maybe more personal to me, but when I was learning about the chakra system and working with the heart, grief was something I just couldn't understand. Like, it didn't feel like I'd had a lot of things to grieve in my life until I remember talking about it with Angelica and understanding a new perspective and meaning of the word grief and the way you explained it, which is loss and disappointment, and sometimes even grieving a part of yourself as you shed that old identity and move into someone new. And I think it's powerful for listeners to understand that, because I think we kind of write off grief as like, well, nothing super tragic has happened to me, so that's not something I have to do. But that's not the truth of it. And you explain that so beautifully, that it's really just that emotional work. And so I'm really interested to hear when you sit with people and help them figure out, okay, how do you live into and embody your Dharma and figure out what healing needs to be done? What type of tools and techniques are you using? You mentioned a little bit of Saturn and the moon, but what specifically is happening there that helps them kind of illuminate their path forward in that?
Well, that's a really good question, because there are a lot of ways in. But of course, the intention for my work with women is to support these bodies in deepening their self-trust around their purpose, their soul purpose. We can't get there without some grief work. So first of all, that desire has to be there already. Like, I can't give that desire to you. That's between you and your soul. So that desire has to be there, first of all. And then the second piece is the willingness. There has to be a sufficient enough amount of willingness in place already between the body and the soul that they're willing to do some work. So usually that requires a certain level of pain, to be honest. For whatever reason, that's part of this journey of being human, is that there has to be some certain amount of pain in order to push us towards the desire of awakening. I don't know, I don't make the rules, but I've noticed a trend with that. And so these women come with that knowing. I have this desire for more. And I know I'm here for something beyond this mundane. And I'm willing to do the work that it takes. So everyone comes with that already in place. How we get there, that's what's interesting. And it's different for everybody. But what's always required is there has to be some grief that moves out of the way in order for space to be made for this joy and this nourishment and this pleasure that their soul is craving in this life, because that's what we're here for. We're not here to suffer the whole time. We're here to transform our suffering into awakening. So we know there's going to be some grief work involved in that. And this is also cyclical. So these are women who are in some cycle or phase of readiness for that. Maybe they are in a sati sat, or maybe they are in a certain dasha cycle that is supporting this. However you want to explain it. Could even be phase of life, right? Or the nature of their soul at that moment. A lot of ways to explain it. But the tools that I work with are supporting the wholeness. So that's a really important part of what has been my journey and what's been meaningful for me, because I meet clients like this, and also it was my experience that we can get very lopsided in our healing work. For example, I grew up with all these spiritual tools, but completely disembodied. No amount of yoga was going to fix that either, by the way. I meet a lot of people who have done years of therapy, but they have no connection with their spiritual body. So then we have to go in and reconnect. So we have to think in terms of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies. This is the wholeness of who we are. The other missing piece that I often encounter, especially with Westerners, is there's no connection with the ancestors. What do you mean the ancestors? What do you mean the ancestral body? What do you mean the ancestral support team? And there's no Dharma without the ancestors. So we can't have clarity on our Dharmic path if we have no connection with the ancestors, because your ancestors give you your Dharma. I mean, ultimately, the bulk of your gifts and your wisdom from an embodied perspective is coming from your ancestors. So if we're disconnected from that support team, you're going to be missing. And sometimes that's all it takes, to be really honest. I've met a lot of clients who we reconnect with the ancestral wisdom and source from that place, and their path is clear. Not everyone, but it's crucial. So we're working with the 4 bodies. And the way that I do that is, yes, it's shadow work. I kind of think of shadow work and grief work as they're connected, but they're not necessarily the same thing. They go hand in hand. but grief work really requires the purging part. Shadow work can be on more of an awareness level, and then the grief work kind of comes with that. And I like tapping. I love actually EFT. I do it from more of an embodied perspective. I work on different levels of the body, kind of chakra levels, with tapping. That's a great resource for everyone can do it any time of day. And once that becomes a resource you can work with regularly, we make even more progress that way because we can regulate the nervous system where it's been dysregulated. So I love EFT for that reason. My background is in a body-centered expressive art therapy. So I bring in a lot of embodiment, somatic resources, expressive arts, as well as the Vedic resources. And I source from nature and animals. The animals are always here, and I live in the mountains in Colorado, and there's no way that nature can't influence my awareness and what I offer and how I understand the Dharmic path. So those are the main resources. And I think there's a therapeutic sort of element that comes in because we all need to be heard and seen. But one of my greatest teachers was Sabonfu Somé. She's now with the ancestors, but she was the one who taught me about grief work, and her lineage in the Dagara tradition heavily influenced my understanding of grief work, and it was a huge missing piece for me in my work with clients. And the understanding of this grief work that we have to do is vital for the Dharmic path. And the piece that I was missing, and most Westerners are missing, is that the way that grief heals and moves is through collective witnessing. So one-on-one, and we all want to hide our grief. Like, I'll tell a therapist about it, but I don't want anyone else to know. And the thing about that is that it doesn't fully move when we keep it private, because our grief is our vulnerability. And that's also our power. And so if we really want to move this grief, and a lot of it's ancestral, it takes community. And often there's so much shame around being seen in our grief that there's resistance around that. But that's one of the reasons I've created my Divine Dharma Circle, is so that women who really want to grow and awaken in this process and deepen that self-trust, there's a safe place to be witnessed, to shed the tears that need to be shed, to walk the challenges that need to be walked, but that there are people with a similar intention, like hearts, like minds, able to hold you in this and know you're not alone. Because that's the wound that so many of us carry on this journey, is I'm all alone in this. Nobody understands. I've been cast out of the tribe. I'm a cycle breaker. I'm a contract worker. The ancestors hired me to do all this grief work, and nobody understands. I don't even understand. And, I'm walking alone out here. And it's so much easier when we know that we have others with us.
Totally. I love that you connected back to that loneliness piece, because it's so true when we do any type of shadow work and go deeper into grief work. It's like you have to out it in order to bring the light in. You have to let it show and literally talk about it and speak about it, because what doesn't own you, or I forgot how this was said, I might be saying it wrong. What doesn't own you will own you.
What you don't own will own you.
Maybe something like that makes sense. Yeah.
Because you're giving away your power to something that has control over me, and truly that doesn't have control over you. So by bringing it to light, by sharing it in community, we found as well it's so powerful, because you feel that interconnectedness, and that's what brings that wholeness. So I love that you brought that all together. I love to hear in your communities and talking about moon healing, um, what you do in your communities to connect with the moon, because the moon, she moves quick. She moves like every 2.5 days. So how do you stay connected with the moon? I guess I'll first ask your personal practices, and then how does your community connect with the moon energy?
So I track the nakshatras, the lunar constellations. Um, the moon moves through a new constellation roughly every 24 hours. And again, these nakshatras are expressions of nature and nature's intelligence. They have certain deities or laws of nature that align with them. And so we can really strengthen that emotional body intelligence, and our body wisdom by tracking those subtle shifts. And I think that's a first step that I would encourage others to do. And also know where that is in your personal chart, because it's also moving through, the moon is also moving through these constellations in the sky, but it's also impacting your body. So, um, if moon is in your head and in a certain constellation, that's good information. And you're going to notice a very different feeling of that than, say, when moon moves to, like today, Satabisha, which is in my fourth house. And today feels different. When we understand sort of the nature of these constellations, we can more easily understand, oh, and that's kind of where this feeling is coming today. And it will also shift in 24 hours. And if there's a reason why maybe you want to use that day for something important, that can also be helpful. So that's my first step. I also track, of course, waxing and waning cycles, and really use that as a way to understand my energy levels, my life force energy, because I'm very moon centric. I have moon in the first house. I'm Scorpio, so I have debilitated moon in the first house. Very sensitive. Yay! Do you also, Angelica?
And Rachel actually have moon in Scorpio.
Oh, the names are switched.
I'm Angelica. Yeah, Rachel is in the tank top.
Yeah, Angelica, I thought maybe you were mentioning that you have Scorpio.
Yeah, actually, so I have my moon in Scorpio, and Rachel's moon is in Scorpio as well.
We're all Scorpio moon here? That's awesome. Oh, I love this. Yes, a lot of my clients are too. We tend to like attract each other.
My whole family is. It's the most wild thing.
Wow, that is really interesting.
Very.
So, well, maybe that's another podcast.
I know. We have a whole we should have a whole podcast with Scorpio and have Laura Plum on it as well.
Okay, I'm not gonna go. Yes, exactly, because Laura, that's one of the ways that Laura and I have connected as well, through our Scorpio moonness. So we'll save that for later. But yes, very sensitive, and you know that already. There's a deep emotional body sensitivity, which is also such a gift. And so in many ways, we have an easier time tracking the moon because that fine level of sensitivity is really there. So my energy levels shift pretty intensely with moon, the shifts of the moon, and also just at this phase in my life, still tracking ovulation and bleeding and all of the cycles and shifts and fluxes that come with that. And I find that is really good for women to track their personal body cycles and hormones and what's happening with the cycles of the moon, because there's always connections there as well. And honestly, it's kind of a daily thing of checking in with what are the emotions that are surfacing, and how can I honor what's moving through today, whatever it feels like. And that's what I've created, as a space for women to check in with the full moon and the new moon. I consider these times that are very important for us to pause and check and just notice what's happening in the body, because we don't really have a lot of places or opportunities in our culture or in our lives where we pause, we check, we notice, we harvest. And then, how do I want to move forward from here? So, having a circle of women to do that with twice a month is really important, I found. And doing embodiment resourcing from those moments can be impactful for the path, the purpose, acknowledging how we're moving forward on our path, doing that intentionally.
I love that so much. And I know Jyotish is such an individual practice. And I love that you use it in community to help people commune around the moon in that way. But I'm interested to hear your perspective on kind of the future. So, what transits are happening now. And if maybe you see from that, maybe you don't, more and more people connecting with their inner spirituality, beginning to connect with the moon, or kind of what things are happening in the sky and how it relates to our conversation today.
So I'm going to be the eternal optimist, no matter what. That's my nature. Even though we have immense grief work to do on this planet, and I believe strongly that's what this pandemic, whatever this is that's happening right now, ultimately it's an opportunity to move undigested grief. And so I want to believe, and I'm seeing evidence of people waking up to the body and the wisdom of the body and sovereignty in body. I'm seeing evidence of women especially stepping into power and wanting lives that are meaningful. It's not everyone, right? But there are many, many special souls on the planet right now who just need that spark of remembering and the right container of support and holding. We all need that because it's so easy to lose our way. And I would like to see a future. I mean, this is my mission. So, my mission and my commitment to my mission in this lifetime is doing everything I can to help female bodies come back to their own power and their purpose, which is through sourcing from our own body wisdom. So providing the right tools, resources, support, and spaces where women have the opportunity to listen, to connect, and to deepen the trust in our divine inner wisdom. It's here, and so much of it is, these are the first 3 steps that I ask anyone who's going to work with me. These steps need to be in place, and that comes back to spending time in nature. And I mean saturated time in nature, not just at a park somewhere. I mean wild spaces. You need to be out in wild nature to really source from her wisdom. Although she's here everywhere with us, I find the benefit of wild, uncultivated, untended land to be so important for remembering our own wildness. Secondly, food. We have to eat nourishing foods, get off the glyphosate, the bad oils, whatever's clogging the nadis, and make sure that we have as much clarity and awake cells and microchannels as possible so that we can actually source from our own body wisdom. And the other piece is movement, gentle movement every day, keeping the body circulating and the life force energy moving and clearing that grief so that we can, and emotion, so that we have space for the joy. Those are the things that I find non-negotiable, because we can't even source from our body wisdom, our talk body wisdom, if those foundational pieces are not in place. And the other key part of that is really environment. I meet so many people, and this has been my experience as well, that the environment just didn't support the desires or the joy and the nourishment that I longed for. And changing my environment was actually the way that that shift happened. And had I known sooner, I would have run to the mountains like 10 years ago, but I didn't, and that was the path. But I like to remind people that it could really just be your environment. It could simply be get out of the city, or get away from your family, or choose a different partner. Because most of this is fixable pretty easily. And it's not going to take that much. Simple, simple, simple. But we have to be willing to make those shifts and those changes. And that takes courage. It takes immense courage.
Yeah, I like to say simple, not easy, right? All simple things in theory, but changing our ways can be met with a lot of resistance. So those are such beautiful tips. And honestly, this entire conversation has been so enlightening and inspirational. So both of us just thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and for sharing your story and your wisdom with everyone. And I'd love to be able to direct people to your work. So where can they find you and where can they become a part of the Divine Dharma Circle?
Thank you both for inviting me to share and talk and connect and resource with you. I love these conversations. I need them as much as you and your listeners. I need to be reminded constantly that there's so many of us, and we're all in this together, and we're not alone in these desires that we have. It's so important, I think, more now than ever, for us to know that we are not walking a solo path, that there are a lot of solo lights that are walking together. And so a big part of my intention is making sure we know that, we feel that, we have that holding, that container, those sacred spaces, and the support we need to not forget, to not fall back into the forgetting. And yes, so the Divine Dharma Circle is the place where we gather and we do ritual and we connect on the level of Dharma and body and creativity. And there's a Facebook group that everyone can join, and then a lot of new offerings that are coming out in the coming months. So I would suggest get on my newsletter as a primary way to connect.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing and being on the podcast today. And everyone listening, thank you so much. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.
Thank you. Good to be with you today.